Sweetheart, I don't know who let you in wearing that little costume, but this is a formal event, not a churchyard sale.
Every crystal chandelier in that Houston ballroom might as well have shattered, because 300 people went dead silent at the exact same second. Zoe Richardson did not look down at her dress. She did not step backward. She pressed her hands flat against the lavender fabric her grandmother had stitched by hand, lifted her chin, and held the woman's gaze with the kind of quiet fire that doesn't come from confidence. It comes from surviving things that would have broken most adults. Victoria Ashland laughed, a high, tinkling laugh designed for audiences, and turned to the nearest table of donors like she just told the funniest joke of the season. I swear, the things they let through the door these days. Someone get this child a proper outfit before we start the program. But here's what Victoria Ashland didn't know. She just insulted that dress in front of the one person on earth who knew exactly where the fabric came from. Let me take you back 6 hours, because this story doesn't start in a ballroom. It starts in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Houston, in a neighborhood called Third Ward, where the rent is always due and miracles are always handmade. Zoe Richardson was 13 years old, a straight-A 8th grader at Lockhart Middle School, and one of 20 finalists for the Ashland Foundation Young Women's Excellence Scholarship, a $25,000 award given annually to a girl in the Houston metro area who demonstrated academic distinction, community leadership, and personal character. The scholarship had been running for 11 years. It was the crown jewel of the Ashland Foundation's charitable portfolio, and every year, the winner was announced at a black tie gala at the Grand Hyatt downtown, attended by Houston's wealthiest donors, corporate sponsors, and local media. Zoe had applied on her school counselor's recommendation. She'd written a 4-page essay about growing up with her grandmother after her mother passed from lupus complications when Zoe was 7. She'd included her transcript, a 4 GPA with advanced placement in mathematics and English. She'd attached letters of recommendation from 3 teachers, her church pastor, and the director of the Third Ward Community Library, where Zoe volunteered every Saturday shelving books and reading to younger children. She was, by any objective measure, the strongest candidate in the finalist pool. But Zoe didn't know that. What Zoe knew was that the gala invitation said formal attire, and she didn't own anything formal. She didn't own a gown. She didn't own heels. She owned 2 pairs of school shoes, one Sunday dress that was getting too short, and a closet that held more ambition than fabric. Her grandmother, Della Richardson, 71 years old, retired seamstress, hands curved with arthritis but still steady enough to thread a needle by lamplight. Della saw the look on Zoe's face when the invitation arrived. She saw the way Zoe read the words formal attire, and then quietly set the card on the kitchen table, face down, like she was putting a dream back on the shelf. Della picked up that card, read it, set it back down face up. "What color you want," Della said. "Grandma, you don't have to. I asked you what color." Zoe looked at her grandmother, and for the first time in weeks she smiled. "Lavender." Della nodded. She went to her sewing room, a converted closet barely wider than her shoulders, and opened the cedar chest where she kept her finest fabric. She'd been collecting material for 40 years, remnants from bridal shops, ends of bolts from fabric stores that were closing down, silks she'd bartered for, satins she'd saved for. From the bottom of that chest, wrapped in tissue paper, she pulled out a piece of lavender silk organza. It was 3 yards, just enough. She'd been saving it since 1996. She'd bought it the year Zoe's mother was born, planning to make something beautiful for her daughter someday. She never got the chance. Now she would make it for her granddaughter. Della spent 4 days on that dress. She cut the pattern freehand, no commercial template, just decades of knowledge living in her fingers. She shaped the bodice, layered the skirt, hand-stitched the hem with a rolled edge so fine you'd need a magnifying glass to see the thread. She added a single detail at the neckline, a row of tiny hand-sewn seed pearls she'd salvaged from a wedding dress she'd altered in 2003. When Zoe put it on the evening of the gala, Della stood back and pressed her hand to her mouth. The dress was simple. It was not designer. It did not have a label. It would never appear in a magazine. But it was perfect. And it was made with the kind of love that no amount of money can buy, because money doesn't wake up at 2 in the morning to restitch a seam by lamplight with arthritic hands. Zoe looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, the only full-length mirror in the apartment, and her eyes filled. "Grandma, don't you start," Della said, waving her hand. "You'll mess up your face. Now stand up straight. You walk in there like you own the room, because tonight, baby, you do." But what waited for Zoe in that ballroom would test every ounce of strength Della had stitched into that lavender silk. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was overwhelming. 300 guests, white tablecloths, a string quartet, waiters carrying champagne flutes on silver trays. The 20 finalists were seated at 2 reserved tables near the front, each girl accompanied by one family member. Della sat beside Zoe, wearing her best navy blue dress, the one she wore to church on Easter, with her reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and her purse held firmly in her lap. They were the only people at their table who hadn't arrived in a car that cost more than their apartment. Zoe noticed. She noticed the other girls' dresses, designer gowns, professionally styled hair, shoes that probably cost more than Della's monthly social security check. She noticed the way one mother across the table glanced at Zoe's dress and then quickly looked away, the kind of glance that pretends to be nothing but says everything. Zoe's hand found Della's under the table. Della squeezed it once. Hard, the squeeze said, "Don't you dare shrink." At 7:45, Victoria Ashland took the stage. Victoria Ashland was 56, blonde, immaculately preserved, dripping in diamonds that caught the chandelier light like she'd been designed to stand in exactly this kind of room. She was the founder and chairwoman of the Ashland Foundation, wife of real estate developer Gerald Ashland, and one of Houston's most visible philanthropists. Her face was on the foundation's website. Her name was on a wing of the Children's Hospital. Her annual gala raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. She was also, and this is important, a woman who had built her entire identity on the appearance of generosity, without ever once examining whether her generosity had conditions. Victoria gave her opening remarks. She talked about empowerment. She talked about lifting young women up. She talked about how the Ashland Foundation sees potential, not circumstance. Beautiful words, hollow ones, but the audience applauded. Then Victoria stepped down from the stage to personally greet each finalist. This was a tradition, a walk along the front tables, a handshake, a photo. The local news cameras followed her. She moved down the line. Each girl stood, smiled, shook her hand. Victoria complimented each one. "What a gorgeous gown. You look stunning. Love those earrings." Then she reached Zoe. Zoe stood. She smiled, a real smile, not a performance. She extended her hand. Victoria looked at her. Then she looked at the dress. Then her eyes traveled down to Zoe's shoes, simple white flats Della had found at a Payless before it closed, and back up again. She did not take Zoe's hand. "Sweetheart, I don't know who let you in wearing that little costume, but this is a formal event, not a churchyard sale." The words landed like a slap, not on Zoe's face, on her heart, on Della's heart, on every person at that table who heard a grown woman publicly mock a 13-year-old child for the sin of not being wealthy. The cameras were rolling. The string quartet had stopped. 300 people were watching. And Victoria, mistaking the silence for agreement, kept going. "Someone get this child a proper outfit before we start the program. Honestly, I can't present a scholarship winner looking like she wandered in from a Goodwill rack. Be honest, what would you have done?" Zoe didn't cry. "I need you to understand that. This 13-year-old girl, standing in a ballroom full of strangers, publicly shamed by the most powerful woman in the room, wearing a dress her grandmother had hand-stitched from silk that was meant for her dead mother, this child did not cry. She looked at Victoria Ashland with eyes that were too old for her face and said, very quietly, "My grandmother made this dress." Victoria waved her hand. "That's very sweet, but this is a formal gala, not." "My grandmother made this dress," Zoe repeated, louder now, "from fabric she bought the year my mother was born. My mother died when I was 7. This fabric was meant for her. My grandmother spent 4 days making it for me so I could stand here tonight." The ballroom had never been this quiet. "So no," Zoe said, "I won't be changing." She sat down. Della, beside her, was trembling, not with shame, with the effort of not standing up and saying something that would have gotten them both escorted out. She put her arm around Zoe's shoulders and held her granddaughter against her side. Victoria blinked. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Was it shame? Discomfort? Whatever it was, she buried it immediately, smoothed her expression back into a polished smile, and returned to the stage as if nothing had happened. "Well," Victoria said into the microphone, "let's get on with the program." But here's where everything changed. Because someone in that ballroom had recorded everything. Not a guest, not a journalist, someone Victoria hadn't noticed, someone standing near the AV table in the back corner of the room, holding a phone at waist level, capturing every word. Her name was Monique Ashland, Victoria's 24-year-old stepdaughter. And she had been waiting 3 years for the world to see who Victoria Ashland really was. Now let me tell you about Monique, because this part matters. Monique Ashland was Gerald Ashland's daughter from his first marriage. Her mother, Corinne, a black woman, a teacher, a quiet force of nature, had divorced Gerald when Monique was 6. Gerald remarried Victoria 2 years later. Monique grew up splitting time between 2 households, her mother's modest home in Pearland and her father's estate in River Oaks. She loved her father. She tolerated Victoria. And she had watched, year after year, as Victoria used the foundation's charity work as a social currency machine, performing generosity in public while privately making comments about scholarship recipients that would curdle your blood. These girls need to learn how to present themselves. I'm not putting my name next to someone who looks like they can't afford a hairbrush. We're trying to attract donors, not run a shelter. Monique had confronted Victoria about these comments once 2 years ago. Victoria had smiled her chandelier smile and said, "Sweetheart, I'm trying to help these girls. Part of helping is teaching them standards." Monique had gone to her father. Gerald had sighed and said, "Victoria means well, she's just particular." No one listened. No one acted. And every year, Monique watched another gala, another performance, another round of applause for a woman who selected scholarship recipients based partly on how presentable they would look in the foundation's marketing photos. So tonight, when Victoria walked up to a 13-year-old black girl in a handmade lavender dress and called it a costume Monique hit record, and what she captured would reach 2 million people before breakfast. The video went up at 10:14 p.m. that night. Monique posted it on her personal Instagram, her Twitter, and sent it directly to a reporter at the Houston Chronicle who had covered the Ashland Foundation's galas for the past 5 years. She captioned it with 4 words, "This is who she is." By midnight, the video had been shared 8,000 times. By 6 a.m., it had crossed every major social media platform. By noon the next day, it was on local news. By that evening, it was national. The video showed everything: Victoria's approach, the look of disdain, the words, every single one, captured in crisp audio because the ballroom had been so quiet, Zoe's response, the trembling dignity of a child defending a dress made from her dead mother's fabric, Della's arm around her granddaughter. The internet did what the internet does when it finds a villain. It responded. The hashtag #Zoe's dress trended for 3 days. The comments were a flood, tens of thousands of women sharing stories about being mocked for what they wore, what they couldn't afford, what they made with their own hands. Black women in particular poured into the comments with a fury and a tenderness that was staggering. That little girl stood there like a queen. Victoria Ashland doesn't deserve to breathe in her direction. Her grandmother made that dress, by hand. That dress has more value than everything Victoria was wearing combined. I had a grandmother who sewed my prom dress because we couldn't afford one. I'm sitting at my desk at work crying right now. But the video didn't just create outrage, it created consequences. Here's the part most people miss. Within 48 hours, the Ashland Foundation's 3 largest corporate sponsors, a Houston energy company, a national bank, and a luxury auto dealership, publicly withdrew their funding. Their statements were nearly identical in tone. The values demonstrated at the recent gala are not consistent with our organization's commitment to dignity and inclusion. The foundation's board of directors, 7 members, all of whom had been in that ballroom, called an emergency meeting. Victoria was asked to step down as chairwoman. She refused. The board voted. 6-1. Victoria was removed. The lone dissenting vote was Gerald Ashland. He filed for divorce 4 months later, not because of the vote, because of what he found when the board conducted an internal review of the foundation's operations. They discovered that Victoria had, for the past 4 years, been quietly redirecting a portion of the scholarship fund into a personal discretionary account she used for gala expenses, flowers, catering, her own wardrobe. The amounts weren't massive, roughly $40,000 total, but they were scholarship dollars. Dollars that were supposed to go to girls like Zoe. Gerald Ashland, whatever his failings as a husband and a father, was not a thief, and he could not stay married to one. But this is where the real justice landed, not on Victoria, on Zoe. 3 weeks after the gala, Zoe Richardson received a letter from the Ashland Foundation's interim board. The letter informed her that she had been selected as the year's scholarship recipient, unanimously. The award was $25,000 to be held in trust for her college education. Attached to the letter was a separate note from the board chair. Ms. Richardson, your essay was the strongest in the finalist pool. Your transcript is exceptional. Your community involvement is remarkable. You were always the choice. We are sorry that the evening did not reflect the values this scholarship was created to honor. We are working to ensure it never happens again. Zoe read the letter at the kitchen table. Della was beside her, peeling sweet potatoes for dinner. When Zoe finished reading, she handed it to her grandmother without a word. Della read it slowly. Then she set down her peeler, took off her reading glasses, and pulled Zoe into her arms. They held each other for a long time. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the embrace didn't already hold the grief and the pride and the exhaustion and the relief, all tangled together the way they always are for women who have had to fight for things that should have been freely given. That night Della went into her sewing room. She opened the cedar chest. She ran her fingers along the tissue paper where the lavender silk had been stored for 27 years. The paper was empty now. The fabric was a dress. The dress was a moment. The moment was a movement. She closed the chest. She turned off the lamp. And she went to bed knowing something that Victoria Ashland would never understand, that the most valuable thing in any room is never the thing with the highest price tag. It's the thing that was made with someone's hands and someone's hours and someone's love in a closet barely wider than her shoulders at 2 in the morning when no one was watching. But the story doesn't end with a scholarship check. It ends with something bigger. Because the video, the one Monique recorded, didn't just expose Victoria. It revealed Zoe. And what happens when the world sees a 13-year-old girl with that much grace under that much pressure is that doors open. A fashion designer in New York, a black woman named Tanya Gayrard, whose label was carried in Nordstrom and Saks, saw the video and recognized something in that dress. Not the style, the craft, the hand-rolled hem, the seed pearls, the way the organza fell. She contacted Zoe's school counselor and asked for Della's phone number. When Tanya called, Della almost didn't answer. She didn't recognize the area code. "Ms. Richardson, my name is Tanya Gayrard. I'm a fashion designer. I saw the video of your granddaughter at the gala, and I want to talk to you about the dress you made." "What about it?" "It's extraordinary. The construction, the finishing. I've been in this industry for 20 years, Ms. Richardson, and I've seen couture gowns that don't have the craftsmanship you put into that dress. I'd like to fly you and Zoe to New York. I'd like to feature the dress in my next collection, not as inspiration, but as a centerpiece. And I'd like to discuss a consulting role for you in my atelier, if you're interested." Della was quiet for so long that Tanya thought the call had dropped. "Ms. Richardson." "I'm here," Della said. "I just need a minute." She sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where Zoe had read her scholarship letter, the same table where the gala invitation had been placed face down, the same table where a little girl had once done her homework by lamplight while her grandmother sewed in the next room, and she pressed her hand to her chest. "Nobody ever called it extraordinary before," Della said quietly. "Then nobody was paying attention," Tanya said. "Would you have stayed silent in Zoe's place? Would you have defended that dress? Or would you have folded under the weight of 300 staring eyes?" "I'll tell you what I think. I think Zoe didn't defend the dress because she was brave. I think she defended it because she understood something that Victoria Ashland, with all her diamonds and donor lists and chandelier smiles, never will. She understood that when someone loves you enough to stitch you a dress from the fabric they saved for your mother, when someone's hands shake with arthritis but still move the needle because you have somewhere important to be, that dress is not a costume. That dress is armor. And you don't take off your armor because someone with a microphone tells you it's not good enough." Victoria Ashland was last seen at a smaller event in Dallas, a luncheon for a nonprofit she'd recently joined. She was not on the board. She was not at the head table. She was in the audience, seated near the back, wearing a dress that cost $4,000. Nobody mentioned it. Zoe Richardson finished 8th grade with a 4. She started high school in the fall with her scholarship secured, her name known, and her grandmother's lavender dress hanging in her closet, preserved in a garment bag Tanya Gayrard had sent from New York, the kind they use for couture pieces in museum archives. Della flew to New York in November, first time on an airplane, first time out of Texas. She wore her navy Easter dress and her reading glasses on the beaded chain and her purse in her lap. And when she walked into Tanya Gayrard's studio in the garment district and saw a room full of fabrics and patterns and sewing machines, she stopped in the doorway and stood there, very still, looking at everything. "You all right, Ms. Richardson?" Tanya asked. Della nodded slowly. "I've been sewing in a closet for 40 years, she said. "I just need a moment to take in all this room. Some people measure worth by labels, by logos, by how much something costs and where it was bought and whose name is on the tag. But the most expensive dress in any room is the one that can't be purchased, the one that was cut without a pattern, stitched without a machine, and finished at 2 a.m. by a woman who loved someone so much she turned grief into silk and silence into pearls. That's not fashion. That's legacy. And legacy doesn't need a price tag. It needs hands willing to make it, and a child brave enough to wear it." But what happened when Tanya Gayrard's collection debuted at New York Fashion Week the following September, with Della Richardson's name listed as a contributing designer, and a 13-year-old girl from 3rd Ward sitting front row in a lavender dress? That's a story that's still being written. If this story hit you somewhere deep, you already know why. Drop a comment, tell me about the thing someone made for you with their own hands that you'll never forget.